All right, I'm here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for joining us here on a Monday. We got a lot to get to. Here. I'm excited. It's a big day. Lots of topics, lots of different sports. We're going to touch on the NFL. We're going to talk some NBA because that happened yesterday, even if you didn't realize it. And it's US Open week in September, and that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on the JMULL show, wherever you might be. Like I said, we got a lot to get to today. We're going to start with some football, and we're going to start with takeaways, what actually happened on the field. But the NFL reminded us of something yesterday, and that's that the NFL is the king of sports in this country. The king. And I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here. I promise you, I recognize that I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here. But there was a Game 6 of a Western Conference playoff series that involves a title contender in the Clippers that was never supposed to get challenged like they're getting challenged right now. Was never supposed to get challenged. Not only are they getting challenged, they could very well lose this series. We're going to talk about the X's and O's of that game here in a little while. But if something doesn't change, something very particular, they're going to lose that game tomorrow. And the Clippers, who I've been on pretty much the entire year, which isn't saying anything, I'm not bragging about that in any way, shape, or form, but been on them all year as a team that I thought would win the title. Now, that's not completely fair. I coming into the bubble, I thought the Lakers had a real shot as well, but in the bubble and certainly in the playoffs, there were times like, yep, this is still a really tough matchup. But if they don't fix something very particular, then they might lose that game tomorrow. But we'll get to that. But nobody cared. Nobody cared. The Clippers put together this team that, you have Kawhi Leonard, who, after last season was considered one of the best players on the planet and still is playing very well in the postseason. Paul George, they made this ridiculous trade to get him to Los Angeles and basically gave up all of their future to get him. And they might lose in the semifinals against a Nuggets team that really, really struggled against the Jazz. And nobody cared because it started at 1 p.m. Eastern yesterday, right as football was starting. And so as a result, you didn't hear about it at all. I wasn't able to find the ratings. I tried to look it up before the show started today. I couldn't find them, but I was really curious to see what the ratings were for that yesterday because I'm sure it was horrible. And that's not their fault. I mean, in a perfect world, if I was scheduling that game, I think you schedule it for, right around the time that the fourth quarter of the second set of games are starting. So 6 or 7 Eastern. Because then you're sort of in that middle ground where, like, some casual fans are really tired. They've gotten to the point where they might be a little tired of watching football, and you got some games that are out of hand, some games that aren't interesting. I mean, you had the Bucs and Saints yesterday that we'll get to as well, and then you sandwich it in between Sunday Night Football that doesn't start until 8:20 on the East Coast. So you've got a good at least hour and a half there to get people watching, and definitely some space where there's no football happening at all, rather than starting it basically as every other football game. Every football game in the first set of games was getting underway. That's not what I would have done, but either way, no matter what they did, nobody was going to care about this particular game. Part of it's because I think we just sort of assumed that the Clippers were going to take care of business in this one. I mean, I kind of did. After they lose game 5, they cough up game 5. They really do. They got destroyed in the second half of game 6. And nobody cared because of the NFL. So the NFL yesterday reminded us just how superior it is and just how much bigger it is than every other sport. Because we've been talking about how awesome this is going to be, that there's, we got playoff football, we got playoff basketball and football at the same time. And that's awesome. But I didn't even consider the fact that, like, if there's football on and it's not the NBA finals, that we're really in a tough spot, which is why I think, which is why the NBA season always ends in the middle of the summer. And I think they could even stand to push it deeper into the summer and start later in the year so that they aren't competing with football for quite as long and they're done before the football season actually starts. But nobody cared that the Clippers got pushed to a 7th game by the team that almost lost to the Utah Jazz without Bojan Bogdanovic. Nobody cared. We're going to talk about that game here in a minute, but I got some takeaways about the NFL season. Listen, it was weird. It snuck up on me, so I didn't spend a lot of time being excited about it. Like, you get to the last week of the preseason in a normal year, and, oh man, here we go. We got a week left. We got a Thursday night football game, and even on Thursday, I wasn't super hyped about it. I was excited about it, but Texans, there's not a whole lot to be super excited about there other than Deshaun Watson, and the talent there just continues to get worse around him. And then you got the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, so you knew I was going to be really surprised that the Texans won that game, so I wasn't incredibly excited about this. But by the time noon rolled around here in my area and football was about to start, I was pretty excited. I was, and we watched a lot of football yesterday, and we got some things to talk about here. We'll start, and with these takeaways in particular, I tried to look at some things that were new. Because, the Ravens being awesome is not news to anybody. That's the most balanced team in the NFL. The rushing game, Lamar Jackson is still one of the most dynamic players in football, if not the best player in football. The Browns still have Baker Mayfield, and they still aren't going to be that good because Baker Mayfield's still the starting quarterback out there. So that's not super. So that's the point being, is that my takeaways more have to do with some of the new things that we've seen, and some of the new situations that we're looking at. So we'll start with, Phillip Rivers, 36 of 46. 363 yards, I believe. But the Colts only scored 3 points after halftime. And he threw 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter and was ultimately disappointing. Listen, Jacoby Brissett was not good in the fourth quarter all year last year. And there got to a point where he wasn't good at all at any point of the game. But the biggest issue with Brissett is that he didn't bring his best football to the fourth quarter. Phillip Rivers was 36 of 46 in this game. Completed 36 passes. I haven't looked at all the stats, but I'd be willing to venture a guess that is really high up there in terms of completed passes in week 1. But man, he wasn't good in the spot that you need him to be significantly better than Brissett. Listen, I don't think there's any argument that Phillip Rivers as a whole is a significantly better quarterback than Jacoby Brissett. From a talent perspective, the guy's thrown for 4,000 plus yards for like 12, 13 straight years now. Clearly, he's better than Jacoby Brissett. I'm not sure that's you look silly if you're making that argument. But he was not better than Brissett when in the situations that the Colts need him to be better than Brissett. And that's in the fourth quarter. 3 points after halftime. That's not good enough. And then Marlon Mack goes down with a lower body injury. I believe it was a tweaked ankle. So you lose some of that ground game, but still. I mean, that Jaguars team is not good. Shouts to Gardner Minshew, baby. Shouts to Gardner Minshew, but that Jacksonville team is not good. Not good at all. And for a team that I just picked in the 110 Sports NFL predictions to win the AFC South, it's not looking good. We got the Titans tonight, and if the Titans lose tonight, playing the Broncos, I don't expect them to lose that football game, but if they lose tonight, then the Colts, they get away with one because the Jaguars aren't going to win this division. So it won't matter if the other three teams in the division are 0-1 and the Jaguars are 1-0 because ultimately the other three teams are better than they are. Specifically, the Colts, I still think, and the Titans. But you got to win that game. And either way, I find it hard to believe that the Titans lose to Jacksonville this year. So that's automatically a game you're giving up that you probably shouldn't, that you should never give up against a team like Jacksonville this season. Who just, you see that on the schedule, and it was supposed to be a foregone conclusion W. They started really well, a really nice long drive to start the season, and then it went downhill quickly from there. 17-14 at halftime, but they only scored 3 points. Phillip Rivers needs to be better in the fourth quarter. It's not often that a quarterback goes 36 for 46 for almost 400 yards, and you feel disappointed, and that's exactly what happened on Sunday for the Colts. 0-1, and they're not off to a good start. Number 2, the Seahawks are very, very balanced on the offensive end. Russell Wilson continues to be awesome. Shouts to Josh Doring. He on our NFL predictions podcast talked about, maybe this is the year that Russell Wilson gets the respect that he deserves as one of the best quarterbacks in football, and actually predicted him to win the MVP this year. He said partly out of spite, but listen, Russell Wilson 31 of 35, 322 yards, passing 4 touchdowns. He also ran for 29 yards, and really all of that came on a rush that was 28 yards long. So Russell Wilson is awesome. But more specifically, this Seahawks offense is very, very balanced. You had 5 different guys run the football on Sunday against the Falcons. You had 9 different receivers. I believe it was 9. That's the number I had in my head. Yep, 9 different players caught a pass. DK Metcalf, 4 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown. Tyler Lockett caught all 8 of his targets. And he wasn't the only one to be 100 to be 100% on his targets in the game yesterday. Russell Wilson, man, he's big time, and that Seahawks, that Seahawks team is well coached, and they're balanced, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in that division and in the NFC. I predicted them to win that division over the 49ers. We'll see. Both of those teams are going to be very good, but talk about a team that is in the hole a little bit. San Francisco going out and losing to Arizona. Kyler Murray was pretty good, but he wasn't great. Garoppolo left some things to be left some things to be sought. You know what I mean? And that's okay. That's okay, but it's not a huge deal, but the Seahawks looked really good. The 49ers didn't after week 1. Cam Newton looks like he's going to run the ball a lot in New England. Only threw the ball 19 times, carried it 15 times for 75 yards. A total of 217 yards on the ground for New England against the Dolphins. That defense is still very, very good. Still very, very good. But listen, if this team is ever behind, they're going to really struggle to win football games. Because clearly it's not in the cards for Cam Newton to throw a bunch. Now, to a certain extent, they become more dynamic, but a good ground game is something they had last year. That's not new news. Now we'll see if he throws it more. But if you get into a point where you're down 14 in the second half, is Cam Newton going to be able? That's the next question for me. Because if the answer to that question is no, then it's just a team that has a very small margin of error, and they need the defense to show up in a big way every single week. Now, they have one of the better defenses in the NFL, and they have the reigning defensive player of the year in their secondary, so it's not out of the question that they show up every single week. But if it's in the cards for Cam Newton to run it as much as he throws it, and he rushed for 2 touchdowns, but it was only 75 yards, and we're talking, that's 5 yards a carry, which is very good for an average yards per carry. But it's not like he's rushing. It's not like it's Cam Newton in college when he's rushing for 125. He still threw for 155 yards through the air, but they're just going to need him to be. Can he throw it? Can he air it out? Can they score points quickly if they need to? And that's the question that we're going to need to see answered at some point. They dominated the time of possession, 35 minutes essentially to 25 minutes, dominated the time of possession. And listen, this Dolphins team is not very good. So we'll see what that actually means when they play a better football team. But it was a pretty good start for Cam and the Patriots. Clearly, running is a very big part of that plan, which isn't surprising considering how physical and big Cam Newton is. But I'd like to see an instance in which you really need him to throw the football and see if he still has that ability. Joe Burrow, speaking of quarterbacks who can make plays with their legs, I think Joe Burrow is capable of doing that in this league. 23 of 36. That doesn't sound right. I might have written that down wrong. But his lone touchdown came on a run, 8 runs for 46 yards. Clearly, he was sneaky athletic at LSU and was very good at extending plays, making plays with his legs, getting out of the pocket, and looks like he's going to be able to do that to a certain extent. Listen, I'm not going to judge any new quarterback on week 1 too much. Peyton Manning went 3-13 in his first year in Indianapolis. And we all know how that career turned out. So I'm really not worried about that. Really not worried about Joe Burrow to the extent of him being not what the Bengals need him to be. It's 1 week, so I don't have a whole lot to say here other than there were glimpses of a good quarterback, of a quarterback that's going to be good in the NFL. And if anything, they were talking about on the broadcast yesterday, very rarely does a rookie become a captain before a game is played, and that's what the Bengals did. They made him a captain. Apparently, they've been very receptive to his voice in the locker room. So clearly, they got a good one, at least from a leadership perspective. Said they've been very impressed by that early in his career, both on and off the field. So, shouts to Joe Burrow. And even though they didn't win that game, the Chargers aren't going to be very good either. The Bengals aren't going to be very good, but that's not, in a sport like football, just having a good quarterback on a team that was really bad doesn't necessarily change a whole lot. Now, if you have really good, skill players and a bad quarterback, you put a good quarterback in there, then maybe we're talking, but a quarterback can only do so much if the rest of that football team isn't very good, and especially when you're a rookie like Joe Burrow. Tom Brady started really well, and then there was a lot of frustration. The Saints were good. Where the Saints won this game, though, was on the defensive end of the football and special teams. 2 picks by the New Orleans secondary. Mike Evans played 63 snaps, had 1 reception for 2 yards. That's going to need to be better, please. Chris Godwin was a little better. Brady, 2 picks, 2 touchdowns. I still think this football team will be one of the best football teams in the NFL by the time we get to the playoffs. I didn't think they would look as uncomfortable as they did against the Saints, and Brady would look as distraught as he did in week one. Now, the Saints are a very, very good football team, and that's not new. Losing to the Saints is not embarrassing whatsoever. One of the best teams in the NFC, um, and certainly one of those teams that has a chance to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. So not a big deal losing, but the Saints, 2 picks, 60 yards worth of punt returns, which at this point in the NFL is pretty impressive. There's a lot of touchbacks and a lot of fair catches in special teams in the NFL nowadays. 60 yards worth of punt returns, and on the other side of that equation, the Saints punter Thomas Moore said 6 punts. 5 of his 6 punts were inside the 20. Brady had a long field all day, didn't have great field position very many times at all, and that just makes a new offense have to work even harder to get all the way down the field, and that's not a recipe for success. Not necessarily his fault that he has a long field, but it certainly makes scoring points more difficult if you don't have good field position. It was a good week one. I enjoyed watching football. I'm ready for next week. We got a couple more games tonight. I believe it's the Chargers, not the Chargers, the Steelers and the Giants. And then we've got Denver and Tennessee tonight as well. A little dual action Monday Night Football to round out week one. But I enjoyed it. The NFL dominates the sports scene in this country. It reminded us of that yesterday as well. Coming up next, we're going to talk about that sport that they dominated over, and that's basketball. The Clippers and Nuggets are going to Game 7, and wow, that's not something I thought I was going to be able to say. But we'll talk about that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Marlon Mack, Colts running back, has officially torn his Achilles and is out for the season. Man, that's a really big blow for the Indianapolis Colts. Really was going to be a big part of that offense. I mean, of course, Marlon Mack was good last year, and that's a blow, man. That's a really big blow. Takes a lot of the balance out of that offense, and they'll have to find ways to make up for it. And like we talked about the Colts in the first segment, and there were a lot of things that were not encouraging, especially on the quarterback play side of things. That's really tough. Nyheim Hines, 7 rushes for 28 yards and a touchdown yesterday, so he's probably going to be their RB1 first on that depth chart, and we'll see how that goes for the 2018 fourth round pick out of NC State. But let's talk about some basketball, shall we? The Nuggets have forced a Game 7. And I really didn't think that was going to be the case. This box score is horrible. And we'll get to the second half in particular here in a second. But the Clippers outscored by 29 in the second half. 29 in the second half. They won the first quarter by 8 and the second quarter by 8. They were up by 16 at halftime. Lost this game by 13. That's not what you want from a team that's supposed to be contending for a championship. Now, they might still. I would probably bet on them to win Game 7 just because they have Kawhi Leonard, to be honest with you. But they do not look good, man. Do not look good at all. And there's, we've talked about this idea of the Clippers being able to turn it on and off. It being their effort, their intensity, whatever it might be, because you felt like there were times where the Clippers were just sort of messing around with the Nuggets, not taking them super seriously. I think it's time to take them seriously. I might be wrong. But Game 7 sounds like a good time to maybe take them seriously the entire time. The Lakers and the Clippers were in two very similar positions in Game 5. Both up 3-1, both ahead at halftime. The Clippers were losing halfway through the fourth quarter, and the Lakers were putting their starters on the bench halfway through the fourth quarter because the game was over and they were on their way to the Western Conference Finals. I still, on paper, like the Clippers more than I like the Lakers, but one thing that LeBron never does is he never loses to a team he's supposed to. He's not supposed to lose to, and he never really gets pushed all that hard by a team that shouldn't beat them. It happens every once in a while, but they never do. They took care of Portland, took care of them after that first game, walked past the Rockets ultimately, and now they're sitting pretty in the Western Conference Finals, and they've only lost two games here in the NBA playoffs. The Clippers have now lost 5. And they better find a way to not lose a 6th, or they're going to be bounced way earlier than anybody thought they were going to be bounced. What I want to talk about in particular is this second half box score for the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George combined for 27. But they were 6 of 21 from the field combined. They each got to the free throw line a handful of times. Combined, they were 11 of 11 from the free throw line. But here, let's run through the rest of the Clippers. Zubac, 0 of 3 in 12 minutes. Marcus Morris, 0 of 2 in 14 minutes. Patrick Beverley only played 5 minutes in the second half. He didn't take a shot. Lou Williams, 3 of 5 from the field in 14 minutes. JaMychal Green, 1 of 3 Landry Shamet 0 of 2. Montrezl Harrell 0 of 2. Only 2 players not named Kawhi Leonard and Paul George scored in the second half of that game, and it was a total of 8 points. 35 points total in the second half, 27 of them from Kawhi and PG, and they weren't efficient either. The only reason they scored as many as they did because they kept getting to the free throw line. Nobody else took a three-pointer. A free throw. Nobody else made a three-pointer. The reigning 6th player of the year played 8 minutes and 30 seconds, took 2 shots, and only had 1 rebound. Montrezl Harrell. Listen, if Montrezl Harrell isn't going to play well, the Lakers are going to destroy the Clippers because Montrezl Harrell is the guy to guard Anthony Davis, and Anthony Davis doesn't like to get physical. And if Montrezl Harrell can be physical and play well, that's a big enough body to really disrupt Anthony Davis. Now, PJ Tucker plays physical, and I'm sure it wasn't fun, but he only can do so much at his size. Montrezl Harrell has the size, not quite to the level of AD, of course, but he's big dude and physical, and that's not what Anthony Davis likes to play against. But if he's going to be relatively non-existent, then the Clippers are in trouble, man. Like, in trouble to the point that they might not even win Game 7. And I really didn't think that was going to be the case. Harrell ultimately played 15 minutes, 5 points. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard combined ultimately for, 33 and 25, 58 points. Man. Not good. Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell are the reason that this team was supposed to be so scary. Because that end of the game lineup could look something like Kawhi, PG, Patrick Beverley, Montrezl Harrell, and Lou Williams. That's pretty awesome. Pretty scary. But neither of those guys are playing like the 6th man of the years that they've been. They need 40 points from them. That's what you're hoping for. I mean, they were both averaging around 18, 35 to 40 every single night. Otherwise, they don't look all that scared because if those guys aren't playing well, then we're talking about Zubac, Marcus Morris, Patrick Beverley, JaMychal Green, Landry Shamet, and Reggie Jackson. Those are your other guys. You need those 4 guys in PG, Kawhi, Montrez, and Lou Williams to play well, or it is going to get scary quickly. It was just sort of a foregone conclusion that those guys were going to perform really well, and that's not to say that that's not to say that that was unfair. Not to say that that was unfair at all. But when they don't perform, it gets scary. Jamal Murray, 9 of 13 from the field in 40 minutes, 21 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, couple of steals, only 1 turnover. Really good game. Not as good as Jokic, 34, 14, and 7. 34, 14, and 7. Ridiculous mismatch in this series, but he's a mismatch against every team he plays. Gary Harris has played really great defense in this series. And one of the reasons why this defense has been so much better, because he got to come back for this series, he added to it in a big way on the offensive end in this game. 16 points, couple of 3-pointers, got to the free throw line 6 times, 4 assists, 2 rebounds, 4 steals. Michael Porter Jr., of course, hit the big shot, but listen, you put Michael Porter on the bench, meaning coming off the bench, not benching him. And when he gets a chance, you can sort of hide him on the second unit here, because you hide him, you don't put him on Montrezl Harrell, you put him somewhere else against a second unit player. And you can hide him enough to play him 26 minutes and get the 13 and 7 that he's become very consistent with. In this series, every time you look up, 13 and 7. In this series, 11.7 rebounds, 18 points, 10 rebounds, 15.6 rebounds, 13.7 rebounds. He had a 5-point and a 7-point performance in game 1 and game 5. But in those 4 games, really consistent. And you bring him off the bench, he could play against the second unit, and he's not nearly as detrimental on the offensive end. On the defensive end. Monte Morris, 10 points in just 15 minutes, 4 assists, 0 turnovers. Very Monte Morris stat line there. Listen, that's a pretty good formula. And if the Clippers don't get any help from their bench was one of the reasons that the bench was the best in the NBA, because they had 2 former six-man of the years and one of the more dynamic pick and roll duos in the NBA, Montrezl Harrell and Lou Williams. They've been relatively non-existent. Now, Lou Williams could go for 30 at any moment. If he goes for 30 in Game 7, the Clippers win. But what we're really looking at here is if they get to the Western Conference Finals, what this version of the Clippers isn't going to touch the Lakers, regardless of how good Kawhi and PG have been. Because, listen, the Lakers at this point, LeBron and AD have been very good. But what's resulted in the Lakers getting in their stride is the fact that they're getting contributions like 10 from KCP. In game 5 of that series, you got only 13 from Anthony Davis, 29 from LeBron. But then you got 10 from KCP, 14 from Danny Green, 16 from Markieff Morris, 17 from Kyle Kuzma, 9 from Talen Horton-Tucker. Alex Caruso, only 5 points in that game, but in the game prior had one of the best games of his career. 16 points, 5 of 9 shooting. That might not have been fair, but the Lakers offense has woken up in ways that aren't just LeBron and AD. I mean, they scored 116 points, I believe, in game 5 of that series. 119 points, and that's in a game in which LeBron and AD only combined for 42. 42. Now, ultimately, you want them to be around 60 combined, of course, in every game. But you're getting production from elsewhere. And that's, Rondo had only 3 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds. Now, this game was not in question at all. I mean, they won the first quarter by 15 and then just sort of cruised. They won the first quarter by 15 and the third quarter by 15 and just sort of cruised everywhere else. So it wasn't, this isn't really a commentary on AD and Rondo because they didn't play super well. Because playoff Rondo is an asset. We stand playoff Rondo around here on the JMULL show, and Anthony Davis has been really good. We've talked about him wanting him to take a few more shots, but he's ultimately been really, really solid. And combined with LeBron, they're scoring roughly 60 in most games, which is what you were hoping for. Right now, the Lakers have far fewer holes than the Clippers do. Even if on paper and with the look and the names on the other roster look better. I mean, a Clippers team that has Kawhi, PG, Montrezl Harrell, and Lou Williams versus AD, LeBron, and then you add Rondo and Danny Green, or pick other 2 peripheral players that you would go quote unquote toe to toe with Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell. Not in any literal way, but you get my point. But the Lakers look like the better team right now. And the holes in the Lakers team are much more... aren't rearing their ugly heads as much as the Clippers' holes are. And the scary thing is that that wasn't supposed to be a Clippers hole. But it has been. And it has been the entire playoffs. Apart from a couple good games in the round 1, Lou Williams has been relatively uninspiring, and so has Montrezl Harrell, even more. You need more from those 2 guys, or they're not beating the Lakers. Really excited for the other series, the Heat versus the Bucks. Excuse me, not the Heat, the Heat versus the Celtics. I think that's going to be a great series. Jason Tatum is capable of being the best player on a title team, and that's scary. They're going to get Gordon Hayward back at some point during that series. Jaylen Brown's playing well. That Celtics team's clicking on all cylinders, and so is the Heat. That's going to be an awesome series. And the winner of that series has a really, really good chance to win the finals, regardless of who they play. And that's certainly not a foregone conclusion, at least not to the point that we thought it might be, and to the point that was really talked about for the overwhelming majority of this NBA season. But we got a Game 7. You need more from that Clippers bench. You need Murray and Jokic to step up, get some help from your peripheral pieces, whether that be Michael Porter Jr., whether that be Gary Harris, whether that be somebody else. But that game's going to be good, and there are going to be some eyes on that one. Never thought we'd get to a point where there are going to be some eyes on that on Game 7. But, on Tuesday we'll have no NFL. So that'll be the center of attention with the Clippers facing elimination and getting bounced way earlier than they were supposed to. Coming up next, it's a U.S. Open week, Winged Foot. We'll talk about what happened at the 2006 U.S. Open, the last time it was played at Winged Foot, and we'll just sort of start the preview of, I'm not going to give predictions yet, I'll do that on Wednesday, but we're starting the conversation about Winged Foot and a U.S. Open in September, which is, if nothing else, pretty awesome and not something you ever see. But we'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. All right, I'm back. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day on a Monday. Hope it's going well. Hope it's off to a good start. Pretty good start around here, if I do say so myself. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us here on a Monday. Twitch.tv/110sports. Guys, it's U.S. Open week. Winged Foot. This leaderboard is laugh out loud funny. In 2006, now we're talking 14 years ago. So first of all of the stars of the game nowadays, very few of them were in this field. Of course, you've got Tiger, but when we're looking at the current rankings in the official World Golf Rankings, got Dustin Johnson, Jon Rahm, Justin Thomas, Rory, Colin Morikawa, Webb Simpson, Xander Schauffele, Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, Patrick Reed. That's your top 10 right now. Very few of them, if any. Dustin Johnson would have been the only one. And I don't think even he was part of it. Let's do a little quick search. Dustin. Nope, no Dustin Johnson. So, the top 10 in the official World Golf Ranking, none of them played in this tournament in 2006. Of course, you know the story. Phil Mickelson was up by a couple shots, by 2 shots, standing on 18T, made double at the par 4 18th to finish a shot behind Jeff Ogilvy. But first of all, here's the top 10. Jeff Ogilvy, Jim Furyk, Phil Mickelson, Colin Montgomery, Padraig Harrington, Kenneth Ferry, Nick O'Hearn, Vijay Singh, Jeff Sluman, Steve Stricker. Luke Donald's on there, just outside of the top 10. Mike Weir, Ian Poulter, Paul Casey, David Duval finished top 20. Miguel Angel Jimenez, top 20. Jose Maria Olazabal finished 21st in this tournament. First of all, this was a long time ago. And second, none of these players are going to compete again if they're even playing. Phil's there, but Phil's an 80-1 odds, and he hasn't driven the ball straight in 10 years. So first of all, this leaderboard's going to look completely different. So there's not a whole lot of experience to lean on, right? Whoever wins this tournament probably has never seen this course in a super intense competitive situation. The other thing is Jeff Ogilvy was 5 over and won this golf tournament. 5 over. Now, every U.S. Open venue is ridiculous. Every single one. Except for, Pebble at this point is a gettable golf course no matter what they do if the winds are down. Now, you hope that, at Pebble, you hope that, you grow the rough out. You hope it's super windy, and that help, it being on the coastline is part of the defense for that golf course. But when it's not incredibly challenging in terms of conditions, you get a leaderboard that looks like what we got last year, where Gary Woodland was 13 under. And everybody inside the top 30 was under par. Tied for 28th was 1 under last year at the U.S. Open. In 2006 at Winged Foot, tied for 26th was plus 13. T32 was plus 14. T32 at last year's U.S. Open was even par. So this golf course is impossible. Impossible. You're going to need guys who hit the ball straight. It's going to be one of those weeks where if you're in the rough, you don't really have a chance if you're in the rough. You're going to have to hit the ball straight. You're going to have to hit good iron shots, make some putts, but this is going to be a tournament where par is your friend. Which is really your friend. If somebody makes 72 pars, the easiest way to talk about this is if somebody makes 72 pars, they're going to win this golf tournament. I would be shocked if the winner of this event is under par. Now, 2006 and 2020, the players are different, the athletes are different, the equipment is different, the ball is different. So it's certainly not out of the question, but I would be very, very surprised. And if somebody is under par, we're talking 1 under par. But really, I really think that we're going to get a winner here that's somewhere between 2 and 4 over par. I really think that's what we're going to get here. And which is, sort of the hallmark of USGA, that they want par to win their golf tournament, over par to win their golf tournament. Even if they'll tell you that they're not trying to embarrass the best players in the world, they're trying to identify the best players in the world. they certainly toe that line a little bit, and we'll see what actually happens. But it's going to be an impossible golf course, and one that's going to give people a lot of problems. This is probably unnecessary, but let's look. So Rob Johnson, 82-82 at last year's U.S. Open, at the 2006 U.S. Open. In terms of players who made the cut, Tim Herron was plus 25. The cut at Winged Foot in 2006 was plus 10. That's laugh out loud funny. That if you were 10 shots worse than par over 2 rounds as a professional golfer, you got to make the cut at the U.S. Open. That is laugh out loud funny. I'm seeing very few rounds in the 60s. Let's see. We got, 69 is the lowest round I've seen. Let's see. Is there anything lower than 69? 168 from David Duval in the second round. 68 there. That's 2 68s. And then once you get down to, anywhere past that, you're not going to get anybody who shot lower than 70. So the point being is that this is an incredibly tough golf course. And whoever wins this tournament is going to be playing incredible golf, and it's not going to look like it from a score perspective. It's going to be crazy how difficult this golf course is. It played as a par 70 in June of 2006, 7,400 yards. It's going to be incredibly tough. Incredibly tough. But it's going to be a lot of fun. A ton of fun. Really cannot wait. We got another major championship. We got another one before the year actually ends, the calendar year, that is. Got the Masters in November. Really, really excited for that. Okay. FYI, let's get into this real quick. The Nuggets forced Game 7 thanks to Nikola Jokic's big night. Like I said, sorry. I'm looking at my Twitter feed. I apologize. Like I said, Marlon Mack, Indianapolis Colts running back, torn Achilles, out for the season. That's really a big blow for the Colts, and we talked about their quarterback issues as well. Cam Newton won his first game as a Patriot. They're going to run the ball a lot over there, clearly. And we'll see if they're ever behind, if they can score enough points to make up for it. Tonight on the football schedule to round out week 1, you got the Broncos and the Titans, followed by the Giants and the Steelers. Watch some football. We got a day for the first time in quite a while that doesn't have a basketball game. We got Miami and Boston starting tomorrow. That's the Eastern Conference Finals, and Denver and LA tomorrow night as well. So we got some football tonight, some basketball tomorrow, and listen, it's we got NBA playoffs, the NFL, a major, the NHL playoffs deep, and it's a good time to be a sports fan. This is one of the byproducts of everything being pushed back, is you get a schedule and a concoction of games that you don't usually get. So enjoy it, and we'll talk about a lot of it on Wednesday. Touchline Talk with Josh Drawing, Around the Bases with Chris Brown, 11 a.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Eastern. Those 2 shows will be back tomorrow. Check those out. Josh does a great job breaking down soccer. He's debuted as European top 25. It's really one of the things we don't see a lot. It's the best 25 teams in Europe trying to figure out who the best teams are, despite them not playing each other because they're in different leagues. Kind of like college basketball. There's a lot of teams that don't play each other. They're in different conferences. What do those mid-major teams mean? If you haven't checked that out and you have any interest in European soccer, I really advise you to go and check that out. And then Touchline Talk with Chris Brown, he's doing a great job with baseball. And if you haven't gotten a chance to check out his show recently, he'll be live at 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. I'll be back on Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, right here, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll see you right back here on Wednesday.